Evenings lit by television glow. Living rooms filled with soft light, familiar voices, and programs that required no focus and promised no surprise. Television screens glowed gently, casting rectangles of warmth across carpets, couches, and walls. The day had passed without urgency, without excitement, and now the evening settled into the comforting cadence of routine. Families, couples, and individuals moved into the soft rhythm of night, guided by the gentle flicker of familiar programs and the quiet hum of electronics. In many homes, the television was the central companion for the evening. The glow illuminated living rooms, reflecting softly on polished tables, picture frames, and quiet stacks of books. The content played without demanding attention. News anchors spoke in familiar tones, their words flowing steadily, presenting facts without drama. Sitcoms played scenes repeated countless times, laughter tracks blending seamlessly with the ambient hum of daily life. Nothing required anticipation, nothing startled. Everything was predictable, comfortable, and calm. People settled into couches and chairs, adjusting pillows, blankets, and body positions to maximize comfort. Remote controls rested lightly in hands. Occasionally, buttons were pressed to adjust volume, change channels, or replay a favorite scene. These motions were small, deliberate, and habitual, performed with the familiarity of muscle memory. The television flickered quietly, casting light and soft shadows that shifted gently across the room. Children often sat cross-legged on the floor, half watching, half drifting. Their attention moved in slow waves, glancing at characters, then at toys, then back at the glowing screen. Parents glanced occasionally from their seats, reading small headlines on the bottom of the news channel, or observing the reactions of children. The room was filled with muted sound, a comforting soundtrack to the quiet passage of evening. In many households, television played alongside other soft sounds. Refrigerators hummed gently, clocks ticked in their measured pace, the occasional creak of furniture marked movement. The glow from the screen combined with these subtle noises to form a gentle symphony of domestic life. Nothing was sudden, nothing interrupted the calm. The evening was uninterrupted, steady, and soothing. Outside windows, the day faded gradually into night. Streetlights began to glow softly, cars passed by slowly, and the faint murmur of distant voices carried through open windows. These external rhythms harmonized with the internal glow of the living room. The world continued moving gently, without urgency, and television provided a reliable, predictable companion to accompany that movement. Programs followed schedules as they always had. Soap operas unfolded with their familiar plots. Sitcoms recycled humor and situations that had become comfortable through repetition. Movies were repeated, their narratives known before the opening scene. News programs provided calm summaries rather than dramatic revelations. Everything unfolded slowly, predictably, and safely. Nothing demanded emotional investment beyond the quiet engagement of observation. Families often moved quietly through evening routines while television glowed nearby. Dishes were washed, laundry was folded, pets were settled into corners or beds. All actions were performed without rush, following the soft cadence of a house in rhythm with itself. The television continued to flicker, a steady anchor in the dimly lit room. Some evenings, music programs played softly. The gentle strumming of a guitar, the slow hum of the piano, or the mellow voice of a singer became part of the room's ambiance. The glow of the screen reflected subtly across faces, creating small patterns of light and shadow. People absorbed the calm energy without engaging fully,
letting the presence of sound and light carry them through the evening. Adults often sat quietly, reflecting in a subdued manner. Thoughts drifted between work done earlier, plans for the next day, or the gentle repetition of familiar memories. The television's glow provided a soft illumination, enough to read small notes, check a calendar, or sip from a mug of tea or coffee. Nothing in the programs required deep thought. Nothing in the environment demanded a response. The evening existed as a slow current, carrying attention gently forward. In living rooms across cities, towns, and suburbs, similar patterns repeated. Each home had its own story, its own arrangement of furniture and people, yet the essence was identical. The glow of the television, the soft voices, the low murmur of conversation or silence, it created a collective calm, almost imperceptibly uniting households in quiet continuity. Evenings extended slowly. Children eventually moved toward bedtime routines, brushing teeth, changing into night clothes, and carrying small toys or blankets. The television continued to glow, fading slowly into the background as attention shifted. Parents continued their gentle activities, reading quietly, preparing tomorrow's breakfast, or arranging small details of daily life. The room's warmth persisted, soft and steady. Clocks marked the passage of hours with quiet ticks. Windows reflected moonlight or the dim glow of streetlights. The world outside had slowed alongside the interior life. Buses completed their evening rounds. Cars glided through streets with minimal noise. Sidewalks were nearly empty. The house, like many others, existed in a state of gentle pause, guided by the slow rhythms of evening and the predictable glow of television. Programs followed schedules as they always had. Soap operas unfolded with their familiar plots. Sitcoms recycled humor and situations that had become comfortable through repetition. Movies were repeated, their narratives known before the opening scene. News programs provided calm summaries rather than dramatic revelations. Everything unfolded slowly, predictably, and safely. Nothing demanded emotional investment beyond the quiet engagement of observation. Families often moved quietly through evening routines while television glowed nearby. Dishes were washed, laundry was folded, pets were settled into corners or beds. All actions were performed without rush, following the soft cadence of a house in rhythm with itself. The television continued to flicker, a steady anchor in the dimly lit room. Some evenings, music programs played softly. The gentle strumming of a guitar, the slow hum of a piano, or the mellow voice of a singer became part of the room's ambiance. The glow of the screen reflected subtly across faces, creating small patterns of light and shadow. People absorbed the calm energy without engaging fully, letting the presence of sound and light carry them through the evening. Adults often sat quietly, reflecting in a subdued manner. Thoughts drifted between work done earlier, plans for the next day, or the gentle repetition of familiar memories. The television's glow provided a soft illumination, enough to read small notes, check a calendar, or sip from a mug of tea or coffee. Nothing in the programs required deep thought. Nothing in the environment demanded a response. The evening existed as a slow current, carrying attention gently forward. In living rooms across cities, towns, and suburbs, similar patterns repeated. Each home had its own story, its own arrangement of furniture and people, yet the essence was identical. The glow of the television, the soft voices, the low murmur of conversation or silence, it created a collective calm, almost imperceptibly uniting households in quiet continuity. Evenings extended slowly. Children eventually moved toward bedtime routines, brushing teeth, changing into night clothes, and carrying small toys or blankets. The television continued to glow, fading slowly into the background as attention shifted. Parents continued their gentle activities, reading quietly, preparing tomorrow's breakfast, or arranging small details of daily life. The room's warmth persisted, soft and steady. Clocks marked the passage of hours with quiet ticks. Windows reflected moonlight or the dim glow of streetlights. The world outside had slowed alongside the interior life. Buses completed their evening rounds. Cars glided through streets with minimal noise. Sidewalks were nearly empty. The house, like many others, existed in a state of gentle pause, guided by the slow rhythms of evening and the predictable glow.
A year that arrived without announcement. The nation woke up to a new year without fanfare, without urgency, and without the sense that anything important was about to happen. There were no parades waiting in the streets, no speeches echoing through public squares, and no collective pause to mark the moment. January arrived quietly, slipping into the calendar like any other page being turned. For most Americans, it felt less like the beginning of something new and more like the continuation of something already familiar. On that first morning, alarm clocks rang at their usual times. Some were ignored, some were silenced after a second ring. Coffee makers hummed softly in kitchens across the country, producing the same dependable warmth they had produced the day before. Frost rested on windshields in northern states, while milder air moved lazily through southern towns. Nothing in the atmosphere suggested that this year would be remembered. It did not announce itself. It did not ask for attention. People dressed for work without thinking about history. Shirts were buttoned, shoes were tied, coats were shrugged on by habit rather than intention. Children waited for school buses with their hands in their pockets, watching their breath form brief clouds that disappeared almost instantly. Parents waved goodbye from doorways, already thinking about errands, meetings, or unfinished tasks from the year before. The rhythm of daily life resumed without hesitation. Roads filled gradually. Traffic lights changed colors in their predictable order. Commuters stopped, waited, and moved again. Radios played familiar voices discussing weather, sports scores, and mild opinions that required no response. There was comfort in that predictability. No one expected the drive to work to matter in any lasting way, and so it passed without being noticed. Inside office buildings, lights flickered on floor by floor. Desks looked exactly as they had in December, with stacks of paper, family photos, and coffee mugs left in place. Computers booted up, passwords were typed from memory, emails were opened and read, some already outdated, others asking for things that could wait. Conversations remained polite and unremarkable. Happy New Year was exchanged quietly, without enthusiasm, and then work resumed. Factories operated at steady speeds. Machines started and stopped according to schedule. Shift workers punched in, adjusted their gloves, and took their positions along assembly lines. There were no dramatic changes to production, no sense that the day was different from any other. The work needed to be done, and so it was done, calmly and correctly, without celebration. In government buildings, clerks returned to their desks after the holidays. Files were reopened, stamps were pressed onto documents, forms were reviewed, approved, or returned for minor corrections. The business of governance continued at its familiar pace. Decisions were made in small increments, shaped by procedures rather than passion. Most of these actions would never be remembered, yet they quietly shaped the direction of communities, cities, and states. Outside, towns went about their business. Grocery stores restocked shelves, cashiers scanned items and wished customers a good day. Receipts printed softly and were folded into pockets or thrown away without being read. Gas stations remained open, their fluorescent lights humming gently as drivers filled their tanks and drove off again, leaving no trace of their brief presence. Afternoons moved slowly. Sunlight shifted across walls and floors. Clocks ticked steadily, marking time without emphasis. Meetings were held, notes were taken, and plans were made for things that felt immediate but would soon be forgotten. There was no rush to remember this day. There was no reason to. At school, students settled into classrooms still carrying the heaviness of winter. Lessons resumed, pages were turned, pencils scratched softly across paper. Teachers spoke in calm, practiced voices, guiding attention from one subject to the next. History was taught as something that had already happened, something complete and distant. No one considered that the day itself might someday be part of a story, however quiet. When evening arrived, it did so gently. The sky darkened without drama, streetlights flickered on one by one, casting familiar pools of light onto sidewalks and empty roads. People returned home, carrying groceries, briefcases, backpacks, and tiredness. Doors opened and closed, shoes were removed and set aside, jackets were hung or dropped over chairs. Dinner was prepared in countless kitchens, often without much thought. Simple meals, reheated leftovers, or something picked up on the way home. Families sat together or apart, eating quietly, talking about ordinary things. The day was reviewed in small details that would not be remembered for long. Televisions turned on. The glow filled living rooms with soft, shifting light. News anchors spoke calmly, reporting on events that felt distant and abstract. There was nothing urgent enough to demand attention. Shows played in the background as people relaxed, half watching, half resting. The year continued to pass without asking to be observed. As night settled in, the country grew quieter. Traffic thinned, lights dimmed. The steady hum of activity softened into something almost peaceful. People prepared for sleep, brushing teeth, setting alarms, pulling blankets close. Thoughts drifted toward tomorrow, which promised to be much like today. While most slept, the year continued forward. Systems adjusted slightly. Small decisions were finalized. Data was recorded, stored, and filed away. None of it felt significant in the moment. There were no speeches delivered in the middle of the night, no announcements made to mark the passing hours. Time moved on quietly, doing what it always does. Days followed days. Weeks followed weeks. Winter slowly gave way to hints of spring. Snow melted, revealing sidewalks and lawns that had waited patiently beneath it. Trees remained bare for a while, then showed the first signs of change. These shifts were noticed only in passing, acknowledged briefly, and then forgotten. People continued their routines: work, rest, errands, conversations. Birthdays were celebrated quietly. Appointments were kept. Bills were paid. Small disappointments came and went. Small satisfactions did the same. Life did not feel historic. It felt normal. Somewhere in the background, policies were adjusted. Budgets were reviewed. Local meetings were held in rooms with folding chairs and muted lighting. Attendance was sparse. Notes were taken. Motions were passed. These actions would shape the future in subtle ways, but for now, they passed unnoticed. Summer arrived without ceremony. Air conditioners clicked on. Windows were opened and closed depending on the day. Children found ways to fill long hours. Adults adjusted their schedules slightly, rising earlier or staying out later. The days stretched, then slowly began to shorten again. Throughout it all, the year remained unannounced. It did not demand to be remembered. It did not mark itself with moments that begged for reflection. It existed quietly, made up of ordinary days lived by ordinary people. As autumn approached, leaves changed color and fell. Routines shifted again. School resumed its familiar patterns. Stores adjusted their displays. The year continued to move forward, still without drawing attention to itself. By the time winter returned, most people could not say what had defined the year. It had passed like a soft current beneath the surface of daily life. It had carried moments, conversations, decisions, and changes, but none that seemed large enough to hold on to. And then, one day, the calendar changed again. A new year arrived just as quietly as the last. The previous one slipped into the past without ceremony, leaving behind only faint impressions and scattered memories. Few would remember it clearly. Fewer still would think of it as history. Yet it had been lived, day by day, breath by breath, forming a quiet chapter in the long, unbroken story of the nation. The year that arrived without announcement ended the same way, without asking to be remembered and without ever raising its voice.
Mornings that drifted into routine.
Each morning looked much like the last. Alarm clocks, warm kitchens, familiar roads and movements performed almost without thought. The day did not begin with excitement or anticipation. It began quietly, as it always had, with sounds so familiar they barely registered in the mind. Alarm clocks rang across the country at slightly different times, their tones chosen long ago and never changed. Some were sharp, some were gentle, but all served the same purpose. Hands reached out from beneath blankets, searching for the button that would silence the sound. Often, eyes remained closed for a few extra seconds, allowing the comfort of sleep to linger just a bit longer. Bedrooms held the stillness of early morning. Curtains filtered pale light. The air was cool, undisturbed. Beds creaked softly as people sat up, stretched, or turned once more before finally rising. These motions were practiced, repeated daily, and required no planning. The body knew what to do before the mind fully woke. In kitchens, lights flicked on one by one. Coffee makers began their slow work, filling rooms with familiar aromas. Kettles warmed, bread was placed into toasters. The sounds were small but comforting. The click of a switch, the hum of an appliance, the quiet clink of a mug placed on a counter. These were not remarkable sounds, but they signaled the beginning of another ordinary day. People moved through their routines without urgency. Cabinets opened and closed. Breakfast was simple and predictable. Some ate standing up, others sitting quietly at tables. Newspapers lay folded, unread, or were skimmed quickly for headlines that did not demand attention. There was no sense that this morning needed to be remembered. Bathrooms filled with steam, water ran, mirrors reflected faces still heavy with sleep. Teeth were brushed, hair was adjusted, not styled for impression, but arranged enough to feel presentable. These actions happened daily, rarely questioned, rarely changed. They existed to prepare the body for the hours ahead. Outside, the world waited patiently. Streets were quiet at first, then slowly came alive. A few cars passed, then more. Engines started, doors closed. Footsteps echoed briefly on sidewalks before fading away. The rhythm of morning expanded outward, touching neighborhoods, towns, and cities all at once. Children prepared for school, gathering bags and jackets with practiced ease. They moved slowly, still half dreaming, guided by voices that reminded them of time. Breakfasts were finished, lunches packed, shoes tied. The same conversations happened again and again, blending into the background of memory. School buses arrived at familiar corners, doors folded open, children climbed aboard, finding their usual seats. The bus pulled away, leaving behind quiet streets and parents who turned back toward their homes. The moment passed without significance, repeated countless times across the country. Commuters entered their cars, already thinking about the day ahead. Familiar roads stretched out before them. Turns were made automatically. Traffic lights were anticipated. Radio stations were selected out of habit rather than choice. Voices filled the car, discussing topics that felt distant and unimportant. The morning commute rarely changed. Even delays became predictable. A certain intersection always slowed traffic. A certain stretch of road always moved too quickly or too slowly. These patterns were known, accepted, and rarely questioned. They provided a strange sense of comfort in their reliability. As the sun rose higher, office buildings and workplaces filled gradually. Lights turned on, doors unlocked. The same greetings were exchanged, often without looking up. Good morning carried no weight beyond politeness. It marked presence, not connection. Desks waited patiently, holding yesterday's work. Papers sat exactly where they had been left. Computers powered on, screens glowing softly in dim rooms. Passwords were typed without thought. Inboxes were opened, revealing messages that felt familiar even before being read. Work began quietly. Tasks were completed in small steps. Emails were answered. Forms were reviewed. Phone calls were made in calm, measured tones. Nothing demanded urgency. Everything simply needed to be done, as it had been the day before. Factories and workshops followed the same rhythm. Machines started up, their sounds steady and predictable. Workers took their places. Movements repeated themselves over and over, creating products that would be used and forgotten. There was no drama in this labor, only consistency. Early morning meetings took place in rooms with muted lighting and neutral walls. Notes were taken, plans were discussed, decisions were postponed or approved without much debate. These meetings did not feel important, and yet they shaped the shape of the day ahead. Time passed gently. Clocks moved forward without announcement. The morning settled into itself, becoming something stable and unremarkable. There was no sense that history was unfolding. There was only the feeling of another day being lived. In schools, lessons began. Chalk touched blackboards, pages turned, teachers spoke in steady voices. Students listened with varying degrees of attention. The subjects felt distant from real life, and the morning moved forward quietly. Across the country, millions of people experienced nearly identical mornings, separated by distance but connected by routine. These mornings did not demand to be remembered. They existed only to carry people from sleep into wakefulness, from rest into activity. As late morning approached, the earlier quiet gave way to gentle movement. Conversations became slightly louder. Work progressed. The day settled into its familiar pace. There was no sharp dividing line between morning and afternoon, only a gradual shift. The routines continued because they worked. They required little thought and offered a sense of stability. In a world that could feel uncertain, these predictable mornings provided something solid and dependable. People rarely stopped to reflect on them. There was no reason to. The morning did not ask questions or offer surprises. It simply unfolded, the same way it had unfolded countless times before. Over weeks and months, these mornings blended together. Individual days lost their edges, merging into a single impression of time passing quietly. The body remembered them, even when the mind did not. Years later, few would recall a specific morning from this time. There would be no memory of a particular cup of coffee or a particular drive to work. Yet these mornings formed the foundation of life, steady and unchanging. They carried people forward, day after day, without drawing their attention to themselves. They allowed the nation to function without pause or reflection. They were the unnoticed engine of everyday existence. History books would not mention them. There would be no photographs, no recorded speeches, no commemorations. And yet, these mornings happened. They mattered in their own quiet way. Because while nothing dramatic occurred, life continued. Families were supported, work was done, time moved forward. And so the mornings drifted into routine, blending one into the next, carrying the nation gently through another day, another week, another year, without ever asking to be remembered.
Work performed softly and correctly. Offices, factories, and shops operated in a steady rhythm where tasks were completed not with passion, but with quiet consistency. The work of the nation did not arrive loudly or demand attention. It simply continued, day after day, in rooms filled with familiar sounds and practiced movements. In office buildings, mornings settled into calm productivity. Chairs rolled softly across carpeted floors. Fingers rested on keyboards, moving with a pace learned over years of repetition. Screens glowed gently, displaying spreadsheets, emails, and documents that required care but not excitement. Work was not rushed. It was done correctly, one step at a time. People arrived at their desks knowing what was expected of them. They did not need to be reminded. The work had been the same yesterday, and it would be the same tomorrow. There was comfort in that predictability. It allowed the mind to relax, to drift slightly, while the hands continued their tasks. Emails were written in neutral language. Meetings were scheduled, attended, and concluded without urgency. Notes were taken carefully, often without being read again. Decisions were made slowly, following established procedures that had been in place for years. Nothing about the process felt dramatic, and that was exactly the point. In factories, machines provided a steady background hum. The sound was constant, almost soothing in its regularity. Workers stood at their stations, adjusting, assembling, inspecting. Movements were precise and repeated countless times. There was little room for improvisation. The goal was consistency, not creativity. Each part was handled with care. Each step followed the last in the same order every time. The work did not require enthusiasm. It required attention and patience. And so it was done, quietly and correctly, hour after hour. Shops opened their doors at predictable times. Lights were turned on. Shelves were checked and straightened. Cash registers waited patiently for the first customer. Employees greeted one another with familiar nods or brief smiles. These were not conversations meant to linger. They were acknowledgments of shared routine. Customers entered and exited. Items were scanned. Change was counted carefully. Receipts printed and were handed over with the same words spoken every day. There was no need to vary the script. It worked as it was. Behind counters and in back rooms, inventory was checked. Boxes were opened. Items were restocked. The work happened quietly, without drawing attention to itself. It supported daily life without ever becoming the focus of it. In hospitals and clinics, the rhythm was steady but controlled. Nurses moved through hallways with practiced calm. Charts were reviewed. Supplies were prepared. Procedures followed established steps. The work required focus but not haste. Precision mattered more than speed. Doctors examined patients, asked familiar questions, and listened carefully. Much of their work was routine, built on repetition and experience. It was not dramatic most of the time. It was careful, thoughtful, and measured. In schools, teachers performed their work with similar consistency. Lessons were delivered. Papers were graded. Attendance was taken. Bells rang, marking the passage of time. Education moved forward quietly, one class period at a time. Janitors cleaned hallways after hours, their work rarely noticed. Floors were swept, trash was emptied, lights were turned off. These tasks ensured that everything would be ready again the next morning. They were essential, yet invisible. In warehouses, goods were sorted and stacked, labels were checked, orders were prepared. Forklifts moved slowly through wide aisles. The work followed systems designed to minimize errors rather than inspire excitement. Accuracy mattered more than speed. Construction sites followed schedules set wrong in advance. Measurements were checked twice. Materials were placed carefully. Progress was slow but steady. There were no grand gestures, only careful planning and execution. Across the country, millions of people performed work that would never be noticed by anyone else. They did not expect applause. They did not seek recognition. The reward was the quiet satisfaction of tasks completed properly. Lunch breaks came and went. Meals were eaten quickly or slowly, depending on habit. Conversations were light and familiar. Talk centered on small things, weather, plans for the weekend, everyday concerns. Work resumed without resistance. Afternoons stretched gently. Energy dipped slightly, then returned. The pace remained even. There were no sudden changes, no moments that demanded urgency. The work continued as it always had. Paperwork accumulated, then reduced. Files were organized. Data was entered. Systems updated quietly. These actions shaped the functioning of the nation without ever being acknowledged as history. In government offices, the work was especially quiet. Regulations were reviewed. Requests were processed. Letters were answered. Decisions were recorded in formal language that removed emotion and focused on procedure.
These processes moved slowly by design. They were meant to be careful rather than quick. The work did not feel important in the moment, yet it influenced lives in subtle ways over time. Transportation workers followed schedules that allowed little variation. Trains departed and arrived. Buses followed routes learned by memory. Airports operated on timetables posted clearly for all to see. The system worked because it was predictable. In farms and rural areas, work followed natural rhythms. Animals were fed, fields were tended, equipment was maintained. These tasks were performed quietly, guided by experience rather than urgency. Time passed almost unnoticed. Hours slipped by as work filled them gently. There was no sense of achievement at the end of each task, only completion. As the day moved toward evening, work slowed slightly. Tasks were wrapped up. Notes were left for the next day. Machines were shut down carefully. Desks were cleared just enough to signal that work would resume tomorrow. People left their workplaces without reflection. The day had been ordinary, and that was enough. The work had been done correctly. Nothing more was required. Over weeks and months, this pattern repeated itself. Work days blended together, forming a steady background to life. The nation functioned because this work continued without interruption. There were no headlines announcing these efforts. No monuments were built to honor them, and yet they held everything together. History often remembered moments of crisis and change, but it rested on these quieter hours, on work performed softly and correctly, without spectacle or recognition. These days did not feel historic. They felt routine. They felt manageable. They felt familiar. And so the work continued, steady and unremarkable, carrying the nation forward one ordinary day at a time. Performed softly, performed correctly, and rarely remembered.
The gentle sound of government. Paper passed from desk to desk, forms were filed, and decisions were made in low voices that never reached the evening news. The work of government was quiet, steady, and largely invisible. Offices were filled with a gentle hum of activity, typing, stamping, shuffling papers, and whispered conversations that mattered to very few, yet mattered deeply to the systems they maintained. In the early morning, clerks arrived at government buildings carrying briefcases, folders, and small notes jotted the day before. The air smelled faintly of paper, ink, and polished wood. Lights flickered on one by one, illuminating rows of desks arranged with meticulous precision. Chairs creaked softly as employees sat down, adjusted their seating, and began the familiar motions of a routine they had performed countless times before. Forms that had accumulated over the previous days were sorted and stacked. Some required signatures, some required verification. Others needed nothing more than careful placement into appropriate folders. Each action, each movement was deliberate, measured, and consistent. There was no rush. The work demanded accuracy, not speed, and the gentle rhythm of these tasks filled the office with a quiet sense of order. Paperwork traveled from hand to hand. A clerk at one desk reviewed it, checked a name, verified a date. She pushed it along to the next desk, where another clerk followed the same process. At each step, the action was performed correctly, without fanfare, without complaint. It was a simple dance of efficiency that kept the gears of government turning. Telephone lines rang softly in the background. Answers were answered politely, often with the same phrases repeated day after day. "How may I help you today?" Or, "Your request has been received." Voices were calm, modulated, and careful. There was no urgency in the tone. Nothing was shouted. Nothing drew attention beyond the immediate task. In larger offices, small meetings took place in quiet rooms. Chairs were pushed out, papers were spread across tables, and discussions proceeded at a slow, deliberate pace. Decisions were made, then recorded carefully. Notes were taken to ensure that nothing would be forgotten, yet no one outside the room would ever hear of the choices being made. These actions shaped local policies, budgets, and services, but they did so without drama or fanfare. Corridors echoed with footsteps, muffled by carpet and the hushed tones of passing employees. Doors opened and closed, some with a gentle click of the latch, others with a softer sound a handle turned slowly. The rhythm of the building was steady, almost meditative. There were no grand announcements or declarations. There was only movement, quiet and necessary. Filing cabinets were opened and closed with a soft pull and release. Paper forms slid into folders, labeled meticulously. Each action seemed small, insignificant even, yet cumulatively it ensured the smooth operation of systems relied upon by thousands. Birth certificates, licenses, permits, tax forms, all moved through hands that treated them with respect, recognizing their importance without fuss or attention. Government clerks sometimes paused to review a detail twice, ensuring that nothing was overlooked. A stamp was pressed carefully onto a form. A signature was checked against a reference list. Even when performing repetitive tasks, attention never wavered. This gentle diligence ensured that errors were minimized and that the quiet work of government could continue day after day without disruption. Lunch hours passed unnoticed for many. Employees stepped quietly into break rooms, filled mugs with coffee or tea, and nibbled sandwiches or small snacks. Conversations were muted, often revolving around minor details of policy, procedural updates, or small observations about the weather. There was no excitement. There was no gossip. There was only the soft cadence of a workforce performing its duty. Afternoons returned with the same predictable rhythm as mornings. Papers moved steadily across desks. Forms were stamped and sorted. Calls continued, polite and measured. Meetings convened and dispersed. Decisions recorded and tasks tracked. Everything operated under a quiet order, moving forward without the need for fanfare or applause. In city halls and municipal offices, similar routines persisted. A planning clerk reviewed building permits, a tax official verified forms, a registrar recorded vital events. Each small act was essential, though nearly invisible. Citizens who benefited from the efficiency often never saw the process behind it, only the smooth functioning of systems that operated as expected. Some offices handled correspondence from other branches of government. Letters were read, routed, and filed with care. Each note contained requests, reminders, or updates that, while important, required no public declaration. Every word was weighed for clarity and accuracy. Every file was stored in a logical sequence. The work unfolded slowly, gently, with quiet precision. Occasionally, visitors appeared at service counters. They inquired about regulations, permits, or appointments. The interactions were calm, unhurried. Forms were explained. Signatures were collected. People left satisfied, often unaware of the careful processes that had guided them. For the clerks, the day continued with the same careful rhythm after the visitor departed. Behind the scenes, supervisors observed quietly, ensuring that tasks proceeded correctly. They answered questions softly, corrected minor mistakes without raising voices, and guided procedures without creating disruption. Leadership was exercised with discretion, favoring consistency and accuracy over spectacle. Throughout all of this, government functioned with minimal noise. Machines clicked gently, files were shifted, pens scribbled quietly. There were no headlines, no evening broadcasts. The work was designed to be effective, not dramatic. Its importance lay in what it prevented: errors, inefficiencies, delays, not in what it announced. Weeks passed in the same quiet pattern. Clerks returned, forms were filed, meetings convened and dispersed, systems operated smoothly. The public rarely noticed, and history books never mentioned these small, vital acts. Yet, without them, the society would falter. The quiet diligence of government employees kept the wheels of daily life turning, unnoticed but indispensable. Evenings arrived without fanfare. Lights dimmed in offices. Desks were cleared. Papers were arranged for the next day. Machines were powered down. Filing cabinets closed. The gentle hum of the building quieted. Steps faded into silence.
and tomorrow the same routine would resume, just as it had yesterday, and just as it would continue tomorrow. It was work performed softly and correctly, work that mattered deeply, yet revealed nothing dramatic, work that required patience, attention, and unwavering steadiness, work that formed the invisible backbone of society. Few recognized it, fewer would remember it, and yet, without it, the world would not function. It was the gentle sound of government, the soft pulse behind daily life, steady, uncelebrated, and essential. And so the cycle continued. Paper passed, forms were filed, decisions were made in low voices. Quiet hands and calm minds carried forward the business of the nation, day after day, week after week, year after year. Unnoticed, unheralded, but always present, always necessary, always gentle.
Streets that carried no urgency. Cars moved, buses stopped, people walked. Nothing rushed, nothing demanded attention, and nothing broke the calm of the day. The streets, wide and narrow alike, stretched across cities, towns, and neighborhoods with quiet purpose. They were the silent veins through which the daily life of a nation flowed, steady and unremarkable, yet essential. On these streets, time passed gently, almost without noticing, as if the earth itself exhaled slowly, holding the rhythm of everyday existence. Morning sunlight touched the asphalt, casting long, soft shadows that shifted gradually as the day progressed. Street lights dimmed as darkness receded, revealing empty roads that soon welcomed the first vehicles. Their engines purred with the familiar hum of daily travel. Tires rolled over pavement in a quiet rhythm, punctuated occasionally by the gentle squeak of brakes or the faint sound of a horn used sparingly. The movement was deliberate, measured, unhurried. Sidewalks were populated by people moving at their own pace. Children walked to school with small backpacks slung over shoulders. Parents, on their way to work, carried briefcases or purses, stepping carefully along the same routes they had taken countless times. Their shoes scuffed softly against concrete, in no rush, each step in sync with the day's slow unfolding. Buses glided along their routes, stopping precisely where needed. Doors opened and closed with a soft hiss, releasing passengers into the quiet streets. The bus drivers, experienced and calm, executed each stop with careful attention. Passengers stepped aboard or departed, their movements smooth, unhurried, and predictable. Conversations inside the buses were muted, polite, and often concerned with small matters, weather, homework, or brief observations about the neighborhood. Cars of all sizes moved slowly and deliberately. Engines idled softly at traffic lights, brakes clicked lightly, and tires rolled in gentle continuity. Drivers maintained distances that allowed room for mistakes that might never occur. Turn signals blinked methodically, windshield wipers swept rhythmically across glass, and mirrors reflected passing buildings and trees, unmoving and silent witnesses to the ordinary passage of time. Intersections were navigated carefully. Traffic lights changed with calm predictability. Pedestrians waited patiently for signals, crossing only when permitted. Drivers rarely honked, and pedestrians moved without urgency. Even in busier parts of towns, the movement was measured, deliberate, almost meditative in its rhythm. Cyclists weaved along bike lanes, their pedals turning in soft cadence. Children on bicycles followed the same routes as their parents, sometimes balancing on the edges of sidewalks or streets. Bells rang lightly when necessary, more as a courtesy than an urgent warning.
Everyone moved together in an unspoken agreement to maintain the gentle flow of the day. Shops opened along the streets, doors swinging quietly, the sound softened by mats and the careful placement of welcome signs. Store employees stepped out briefly to check sidewalks or adjust displays, returning to their routines. Deliveries arrived with the faint murmur of engines and careful handling of packages. Packages were unloaded systematically, stacked in neat rows, and brought inside without hurry, each action performed with gentle precision. Public parks adjacent to streets saw small groups moving slowly along paths. Joggers ran in measured paces, mindful of their surroundings. Dog walkers carried leashes with the same steady cadence, speaking softly to animals that trotted beside them. Leaves rustled lightly underfoot, and birds shifted among trees, blending with the overall quietude of the day. Side streets were even calmer. Houses with front yards and picket fences lined narrow roads. Mailboxes were opened, letters retrieved, and doors opened and closed in soft succession. Lawnmowers hummed occasionally, children's voices drifted in the distance, and sprinklers splashed gently, all contributing to the steady, unbroken rhythm of everyday life. Traffic cameras and signs watched without interruption. They stood silently, marking movement without judgment. Stop signs waited for obedience. Street signs guided travelers along familiar paths. The city and town infrastructure performed their duties without need for attention or celebration. Even minor interruptions were handled calmly. A slow-moving delivery truck temporarily halted traffic, and vehicles paused with patience. A pedestrian crossed unexpectedly, and drivers adjusted smoothly. A cyclist swerved gently to avoid a puddle, and the surrounding flow adapted without disturbance. The collective understanding of order and routine ensured that nothing became urgent. Weather influenced the streets subtly. Sunlight warmed the pavement, creating small shifts in the reflections of windows and puddles. Light rain fell occasionally, soft enough to add rhythm without causing haste. Snow, when present, slowed movement naturally, prompting careful steps and cautious driving. In all cases, the day continued at its measured pace, uninterrupted by drama or haste. The gentle hum of government offices, shops, and factories echoed faintly into the streets. Mail carriers walked with rhythmic steps, delivering correspondence to homes and offices. Street sweepers operated slowly, their brushes moving predictably along curbs. Maintenance crews inspected signs, repaired minor damage, and moved along, all in synchrony with the quiet rhythm of the roads. Commuters traveled to offices, schools, and workplaces without tension. Bicycles, buses, and cars flowed together, their collective movement forming a tapestry of calm. Streets acted as channels for human activity, yet remained intrusive and unobtrusive. They connected homes to schools, stores to offices, parks to neighborhoods, all in quiet cooperation. During lunch hours, streets were even quieter. Fewer cars moved, pedestrians paused at cafes or restaurants, stepping lightly along sidewalks. Delivery trucks completed their rounds with careful timing. The soft chatter of diners drifted out of open windows, mixing gently with the ambient hum of the city. There was no rush, only the continuity of daily life in measured steps. In residential areas, people walked dogs, collected mail, or chatted briefly with neighbors. The interactions were slow and polite. Children ran slightly, laughed quietly, and returned to their homes without incident. The day moved on without drama or urgency. As afternoon waned, streets shifted subtly. School buses returned with children. Office workers trickled back from lunch. Cars moved back into commuting patterns. The tempo remained gentle, guided by habit and shared understanding. Nothing demanded attention. Nothing broke the calm. Evenings arrived with similar subtlety. Streetlights flickered gradually. Cars glided home. Pedestrians returned to their doors. Shops closed quietly. The rhythm of the streets softened as the day ended. The city exhaled gently, moving toward the stillness of night. Nighttime brought further calm. Few vehicles moved. Streetlights cast pools of light onto sidewalks. Windows glowed faintly as families settled inside. The streets, having carried the day with gentle consistency, rested. Shadows stretched across pavement. The hum of distant traffic faded. Quiet enveloped the town or city. And yet the work of the streets persisted in memory. They connected the nation, allowed movement, and facilitated daily life without requiring recognition. Cars, buses, bicycles, and pedestrians moved in unison, never in a hurry, never demanding notice. Their purpose was quiet, reliable, and unbroken. In all of this, the streets carried no urgency. They were neither dramatic nor remarkable. They were essential, steady, and unassuming. They formed the backdrop to every other part of life, the offices.
Afternoons that slowly faded. Time stretched gently as sunlight shifted across rooms, clocks ticked, and the day leaned quietly toward evening. Afternoons in the nation unfolded without fanfare, without urgency, and without the expectation of notice. The world moved gently, as if aware of its own rhythm, drifting slowly toward the softer light of late day. Windows framed quiet streets, backyards, and sidewalks, all bathed in a gradually warming glow that promised neither excitement nor alarm, only continuity. In homes across the country, the late hours of the afternoon brought familiar movements. Children returned from school, their shoes carrying traces of playgrounds and sidewalks walked in measured steps. Backpacks were dropped gently, lunches repacked or finished, and homework assignments slowly opened. Each movement had been repeated countless times, practiced almost unconsciously, blending with the larger rhythm of daily life. In offices, keyboards clicked softly, papers shifted, and fingers moved in patterns perfected over years. Employees paused occasionally, stretching or sipping coffee left over from the morning. Their movements were quiet, deliberate, almost meditative, as though the passage of time itself were a companion in their work. No deadlines screamed for attention. Nothing demanded sudden action. The day's continuity was sufficient. Factories hummed with the gentle drone of machinery. Conveyor belts moved steadily. Tools were adjusted carefully. Workers shifted in their routines, performing each task with precision and patience. The afternoon's rhythm was steady, uninterrupted, the same familiar cycle that had carried them through countless days. Time seemed to stretch within the walls, measured not in urgency, but in the continuity of motion and sound. Streetlights outside homes began to cast faint glows against the shifting sunlight. Cars moved along suburban roads at measured speeds. Children rode bicycles home slowly, their laughter muted by distance and familiarity. Pedestrians passed quietly, some heading to shops, others to parks, their steps steady, unhurried.
Even in motion, the day remained soft, calm, and controlled. Shops along main streets continued their quiet commerce. Clerks arranged merchandise, restocked shelves, and rang up purchases with practiced hands. The soft chime of cash registers punctuated the calm. Patrons moved slowly from aisle to aisle, selecting items with measured thought, paying without rush, and leaving quietly. There was no urgency in these movements, only gentle, necessary actions, part of the seamless fabric of afternoon life. In homes, kitchens filled with the subtle aromas of cooking. Stovetops hummed, ovens worked slowly, and dishes were prepared with attention, but without haste. Conversations drifted gently between family members, soft enough to avoid breaking the quiet of the afternoon. Children recounted small events from school. Adults spoke of work in tones that were factual, not animated. Each word, each gesture flowed naturally into the rhythm of time. Public spaces, too, reflected the lazy unfolding of afternoon. Parks held joggers in measured paces, dog walkers in soft steps, and swings swaying gently in quiet intervals. Water fountains splashed lightly. Birds moved from tree to tree. Leaves rustled softly in a breeze that carried warmth and calm. The world was alive, yet subdued, a perfect balance between motion and stillness. Clocks ticked methodically. The passage of minutes and hours marked the progression of time without intrusion. There were no sudden chimes or alarms, only the steady heartbeat of temporal order. Windows reflected sunlight as it slowly shifted, brushing across floors, walls, and furniture with a lazy inevitability. Shadows lengthened imperceptibly, merging with other shadows until the soft palette of late afternoon settled over every space. In offices and public buildings, the quiet of the afternoon allowed attention to drift slightly. Tasks were performed with care, but without strain. Conversations were muted, polite, and deliberate. People moved gently from one task to another, guided by the innate knowledge of the day's progression. The pace encouraged observation of small details, the way sunlight fell across a desk, the slight hum of machinery, or the faint creak of a chair. Each observation was subtle, contributing to a gentle awareness of time passing. Transportation systems maintained their measured flow. Buses continued to stop at their scheduled points. Cars glided along predictable routes, and trains hummed steadily along tracks. There was no rush, only consistency. Passengers waited patiently, moved politely, and followed patterns they had internalized over months and years. The movement of people reflected the calm of the streets themselves, slow and deliberate. Schools experienced a similar drift. Classrooms transitioned from lunch periods to lessons. Teachers spoke softly, guiding attention without haste. Students wrote, read, and listened with quiet focus. The afternoon stretched, filling the hours gently, as if time itself had slowed to accommodate the careful passage of learning and growth. The rhythm of education matched the rhythm of the larger world outside classroom walls. In residential areas, lawns were tended carefully. Hoses flowed steadily. Sprinklers traced arcs across grass, and leaves were swept in slow arcs. Gardeners worked methodically, aware of the afternoon sun, but never rushed by it. The physical labor was steady, predictable, and harmonized with the longer tempo of the day. As the sun moved lower, shadows grew longer. Windows reflected warmer hues. The light softened, almost tactile in its warmth. people paused for brief moments to notice the change, the angle of sunlight across a table, the glint of late afternoon on a car's surface, or the sound of a distant lawnmower finishing its work. These small observations carried a quiet pleasure, unnoticed by many, yet part of the intimate rhythm of life. Errands continued at a gentle pace. Shoppers moved slowly along sidewalks, carrying light bags. Post offices saw a soft flow of visitors. Delivery vehicles worked efficiently, yet with care. There were no crowds, no urgency, and no drama. Life continued in measured steps, each action unfolding naturally from the last. Inside homes, children prepared for evening routines. Homework was finished, toys were put away, and quiet conversations were exchanged. Meals were anticipated, but prepared without rush. Parents guided small tasks with calm voices, emphasizing completion and order over speed or excitement. The pace remained gentle, fostering continuity and calm. Evening approached imperceptibly. Streetlights flickered faintly, blending with the remaining sunlight. Sounds softened further. Conversations quieted. Windows reflected the gradual fading of natural light. The day moved steadily, leaning into night without resistance or notice. Time, as measured in the soft ticking of clocks, continued its slow progression. The rhythm of the afternoons was steady, deliberate, and unremarkable, and yet it carried life forward. Every soft step, every muted sound, every gentle motion formed the unnoticed heartbeat of the nation. These afternoons, stretching gently and fading slowly, connected morning to evening, work to rest, movement to stillness. They offered continuity, stability, and reassurance. They reminded everyone that life could proceed without rush, without urgency, and without drama. As the last rays of sunlight touched rooftops, cars continued their careful movement along quiet streets. Pedestrians returned home. Shops completed their final transactions. The gentle hum of the city, the town, and the suburbs began to settle into calm. The slow, soft progression of time brought the day to its inevitable transition. And so afternoons slowly faded, leaving behind
Nights of ordinary rest. Homes settled into silence as lights dimmed, doors closed, and sleep arrived without reflection or memory. The day's movements, once steady and visible, now softened into shadows. Rooms exhaled quietly, letting chairs, tables, and floors rest beneath the weight of familiarity. Outside, streets grew still. Cars moved only rarely, their engines whispering along distant roads. Even the hum of distant activity diminished, leaving a vast, gentle calm across neighborhoods, towns, and cities. Inside bedrooms, beds awaited patiently. Pillows fluffed, blankets straightened, mattresses bearing silent witness to daily routines. People moved slowly toward rest, shedding clothes, shoes, and thoughts alike. The final steps of daily life were deliberate yet unhurried. A glass of water taken, a book closed, a light turned off. Nothing was rushed, nothing demanded attention. Sleep had arrived quietly, as it always had, without ceremony or urgency. Windows reflected the fading light from street lamps and moon, casting pale, shifting patterns across walls and floors. Curtains, drawn partially or fully, filtered these dim illuminations into soft glows that drifted across bedrooms. The glow was gentle enough to comfort without stimulation. Shapes softened in the darkened spaces. Shadows merged and stretched, creating rooms that were intimate and restful.
In homes with children, nightly routines followed familiar rhythms. Teeth brushed with soft strokes, pajamas slipped on, and small toys or blankets were carried to beds. Parents guided these movements gently, speaking in hushed tones that encouraged calm without force. Storybooks might be read aloud, but slowly, methodically, with pauses to let the words sink into quiet minds. Laughter was soft, whispers rare. Even the act of closing a bedroom door was careful, almost ceremonial, signaling the transition from day to night. Adults prepared for sleep in equally deliberate fashion. The final glance at email or calendar screens was brief. Lights were dimmed strategically to ease the eyes. Chairs were tucked beneath desks. Evening rituals, stretching, adjusting pillows, checking locks, were performed quietly and methodically. These small gestures formed a bridge between wakefulness and the restorative calm of sleep. Nothing in the evening required reflection. Everything existed simply to prepare for rest. In homes without children, the process was quieter but no less deliberate. Lamps dimmed, televisions powered off, and soft music faded. Evening light waned gently, and the occupants of these spaces adjusted slowly to the absence of stimulation. The mind began to release the day's concerns. Thoughts drifted into abstraction. Sleepiness crept gradually, unnoticed, until eyes closed completely. Muscles relaxed without effort. Hearts maintained calm, steady beats. The day's continuity dissolved into night's gentle stillness. Pet companions adjusted alongside humans. Dogs curled in corners. Cats nestled on beds. Even small animals in cages or aquariums settled. Their presence added a subtle rhythm, a reassurance of life continuing gently alongside human occupants. Every household shared this soft cadence, unaware but aligned, forming a collective quiet that spread across neighborhoods and regions alike. Street sounds diminished gradually as night deepened. Occasional passing cars whispered along the asphalt. Dogs barked occasionally in the distance. Leaves rustled softly in light breezes. Even the wind seemed tempered, moving slowly, as if respecting the nation's collective repose. The world outside matched the quiet within homes, reinforcing the gentle atmosphere conducive to rest. In cities, apartment dwellers adjusted in parallel. Lights in living spaces dimmed. Elevators hummed intermittently. Residents moved quietly to bedrooms or shared spaces, minimizing noise. The glow of streetlights reflected off windows, softened by curtains and blinds, casting muted shapes across furniture and floors. Life continued at a distance, yet the immediate environment held stillness and calm. Telephones were muted or turned off. Computers and screens powered down. Small devices hummed softly in the background, yet failed to disturb the overarching quiet. Even entertainment systems that had engaged attention throughout the day had surrendered to the soft inevitability of night. Darkness, calm, and soft illumination guided households toward the inevitable state of sleep. Time passed unmarked by significant events. Minutes and hours flowed gently, unnoticed. Sleep deepened gradually. Dreams, when they arrived, were soft and muted. The night continued uninterrupted until dawn would eventually reclaim space and light. And throughout, the ordinary rhythms of life, breathing, heartbeat, and ambient sounds remained constant, providing gentle continuity. Across the country, millions of homes mirrored one another in this slow descent to rest. Each household moved through similar sequences: lights dimmed, doors closed, routines completed, bodies settled. Each individual transitioned into sleep without reflection or expectation. Across neighborhoods, cities, and states, the nation collectively rested in unremarkable yet essential rhythm. Sleep arrived without demand or ceremony. No one consciously marked its coming. No headlines announced it. No one needed to record it. And yet it was vital. The body, mind, and spirit all depended on this nightly quiet. The nation functioned on this unseen, uncelebrated foundation. Homes became sanctuaries. The soft weight of blankets, the steady breathing of occupants, and the muffled cadence of distant life created spaces in which sleep could flourish. Darkness deepened, shadows softened, and light receded. The nation, in countless separate yet parallel locations, rested under the same invisible canopy of night. Nights of ordinary rest required nothing of those who experienced them. No effort was needed beyond surrendering to the gentle rhythms. No excitement was demanded. No memory was created. And yet these nights sustained life, preserved routine, and allowed the continuity of the nation's movement from one day to the next. Soft, steady, unremarkable, and essential. In these quiet, ordinary nights, the world slowed to a gentle pulse. Sleep enveloped homes and hearts alike. The day faded completely. All movement ceased, leaving the nation to rest, silently, softly, and predictably, until the next morning would arrive quietly once again.
Small changes no one noticed. While most slept, policies shifted slightly, systems adjusted, and the future moved forward by inches rather than leaps. The night provided the quiet cover for subtle movements, invisible to the eye, unnoticed by the public, yet essential to the continuation of daily life. In offices, government buildings, factories, banks, and administrative centers, the machinery of society hummed in low, steady tones, recalibrating itself without fanfare. In municipal offices, small adjustments were recorded meticulously in ledgers, spreadsheets, and digital files. Clerks working in night shifts or through automated systems ensured that numbers aligned, schedules were corrected, and minor errors from the day were amended. No one watching the world outside could see these interventions. They were soft, invisible, precise, yet they maintained order. Tax calculations were updated. Budgets were shifted subtly to account for minor discrepancies. Births and deaths were recorded, licenses issued, permits adjusted. Each action was small in itself, a fraction of a process, but accumulated over time, these minute changes shaped the functioning of society. One person might never notice, yet the nation as a whole relied on the quiet continuity these efforts ensured. Factories performed incremental maintenance during late hours. Conveyor belts were adjusted, machines calibrated, and minor malfunctions corrected before the next day's production began. Workers, present only in small night crews, moved carefully and slowly, ensuring that each change was accurate. Nothing dramatic occurred, no alarms rang. The adjustments were so subtle that the day's machinery continued seamlessly without interruption. Transportation systems also participated in these quiet calibrations. Train schedules were corrected, tracks inspected, signals realigned, and buses had minor timing shifts implemented. Drivers and operators noted changes that would affect the day ahead, yet none of it created immediate disruption. The city's arteries flowed as always, carrying the same rhythm of movement into morning, imperceptibly adjusted and corrected. Banks and financial institutions processed transactions, reconciled accounts, and completed internal audits in quiet offices, lit only by soft lamps or the glow of monitors. Minor discrepancies were corrected, transfers were approved.
Automated systems shifted balances, ensuring that when citizens awoke, the world appeared steady, stable, and orderly. Few noticed these interventions, but without them, the smoothness of daily life would falter. Policies, too, moved quietly. Administrative memos were filed, rules were clarified, directives were issued in language precise enough to guide action, yet subtle enough to escape public notice. Bureaucrats working in night shifts ensured that regulations were current, interpretations corrected, and procedures aligned. The nation's framework shifted incrementally, minute changes accumulating in silent progression. Schools experienced these subtle adjustments as well. Student records were updated, lesson schedules were refined, cafeteria orders were corrected, attendance tallied, and minor issues resolved. Teachers and administrators preparing for the following day participated in these quiet motions, adjusting small details that would smooth operations once students returned in daylight. Hospitals and clinics also benefited from subtle night work. Records were reconciled, schedules for appointments and procedures were fine-tuned, medications were checked and verified, machines were calibrated. Nothing about these adjustments drew attention from the patients resting within, yet every slight correction ensured that care continued smoothly the next day. Streetlights, traffic signals, and infrastructure continued functioning silently. Sensors recalibrated, timers adjusted, maintenance crews corrected small imperfections, often under the dim glow of lamplight or vehicle headlights. Each change was minor, imperceptible to the passerby, yet collectively, these modifications prevented potential disruptions before morning arrived. In homes, even the smallest changes went unnoticed. Thermostats adjusted automatically, water pressure stabilized, appliances prepared for use, performing internal calibrations that kept life running smoothly. Even as families slept, the environment subtly readjusted itself in anticipation of the coming day. Corporate offices participated as well. Automated systems updated records, adjusted inventory, and monitored operations. Managers on late shifts implemented small policy tweaks. Production quotas were fine-tuned. Emails scheduled for the next morning contained minor clarifications. Everything moved forward silently, accurately, and predictably. Even nature joined in these imperceptible changes. Street trees were watered by timed sprinklers. Parks and lawns received irrigation. Waste collection systems operated quietly. Rivers, canals, and reservoirs were monitored for flow and quality, with adjustments made without human notice. The world, both natural and man-made, progressed quietly during these hours of rest. Government departments processed communications, rerouted documents, and adjusted internal schedules. Minutes, memos, and directives were stored for future use. Policies that would influence actions days or weeks later were clarified. No public announcement accompanied these movements. Their importance lay in preventing errors, smoothing operations, and maintaining continuity. Transportation hubs performed slight corrections overnight. Trains were realigned, runways inspected, and flight schedules updated. Maintenance crews worked quietly, aware of minute imperfections that could ripple into delays or inefficiencies if uncorrected. Their labor was unnoticed by passengers, yet essential to the smooth operation of the following day. In industries dependent on raw materials, supply chains were calibrated overnight. Shipments were logged, arrivals confirmed, and inventory updated. Minor shortages were identified and addressed. Machines monitored consumption and adjusted output. No one outside the system perceived these interventions, yet the flow of goods and services depended entirely on them. Postal services processed letters and packages with the same careful precision. Sorting machines, attended by quiet operators, shifted items along correct routes. Delivery schedules were updated. Minor delays were anticipated and corrected. Millions of communications, small and large, moved invisibly yet reliably across cities and towns. Even in research institutions, subtle corrections occurred. Data was verified, experiments were logged, instruments were calibrated. Scientists on late shifts ensured that measurements were accurate so that progress could continue without interruption the next day. These adjustments were invisible to the world outside, yet they moved knowledge forward incrementally, step by step, inch by inch. In government archives and legal offices, documents were filed with precision, errors were corrected, references cross-checked, records updated. The day's decisions, though invisible to the public, were made operational by these quiet corrections. Minute shifts, when aggregated, moved processes, programs, and procedures forward. Utilities, too, made subtle overnight adjustments. Electricity grids balanced loads. Water systems ensured stable pressure. Gas pipelines monitored flows. Technicians observed readings, corrected minor anomalies, and maintained consistent supply. Homes, businesses, and infrastructure awoke to smooth operations, unaware of the small changes that made them possible. By morning, the effects of these quiet adjustments were seamless. Citizens noticed nothing unusual. Life appeared continuous, stable, and predictable. Systems functioned as expected. Roads carried traffic. Schools opened on schedule. Offices operated smoothly. Factories produced without disruption. Even small, cumulative policy changes had integrated themselves into daily reality without fanfare. The nation moved forward by inches, not leaps. Each small correction, adjustment, and procedural shift laid the groundwork for the next day. The quiet work of individuals, night staff, automated systems, and nature itself ensured that life continued without disruption, silently propelling society into the future. Sleepers remained unaware of these subtle motions. Children dreamed, adults rested, and the world outside was still. Yet beneath the calm, imperceptible currents of night ensured that tomorrow would proceed smoothly.
A year that ended without being remembered. The calendar turned again, and almost no one realized they had lived through a piece of history at all. Days had drifted into weeks, weeks into months, and months into the quiet progression of a year. Nothing dramatic had marked its passing. No headline captured its essence. No public celebration commemorated its movement. And yet, quietly, unobserved, life had unfolded, carrying the nation forward in gentle, persistent rhythm. Morning had arrived countless times, each day beginning in the same unremarkable fashion. Alarm clocks buzzed and rang. People rose from beds. Breakfasts were prepared. Coffee poured. Lunches packed. Streets welcomed familiar traffic patterns. Workplaces opened with the same quiet efficiency they always had. Offices, factories, schools, and homes repeated their daily motions, marking time in predictable, soothing steps. Almost no one reflected on the passage of the year as it happened. It moved softly, almost invisible in its continuity. Mornings gave way to afternoons, which stretched into evenings. The ordinary flow of life continued as if the year itself were a silent observer, moving alongside humans, unnoticed, unheralded, yet fully present. People completed tasks without urgency. Conversations occurred, then faded. Children played, then returned to quiet rooms. Streets moved gently, cars and buses gliding along paths well known and routine. The nation progressed without drama, without applause, without acknowledgement. Throughout the year, the work of countless individuals sustained the steady hum of society. Clerks filed forms, teachers guided students,
Delivery drivers completed routes, nurses tended patients, and citizens carried out their daily obligations. Each action was minor in isolation, yet collectively these movements ensured that the mechanisms of daily life never faltered. Even as history quietly marched onward, no one was aware that the world had shifted beneath their feet. Seasons changed almost imperceptibly. Winter's chill gave way to spring's soft warmth. Flowers emerged, grew, and withered. Summer brought gentle heat, occasional rain, and slow-growing shadows. Fall leaves turned, fell, and decayed quietly. Each season passed with minimal fanfare, its shifts observed by few. The world moved forward while attention remained in the minutiae of daily existence. Life carried on, steady, reliable, and unremarkable. Government offices and bureaucracies continued quietly, maintaining the framework that allowed the nation to function. Policies were adjusted in small, nearly invisible ways. Systems recalibrated, ensuring the wheels of society turned smoothly. Legislation passed with measured deliberation. Social programs continued their routines, and infrastructure projects inched forward without public notice. These small adjustments accumulated over months, creating subtle shifts in the functioning of the nation without causing immediate recognition. Economies moved slowly. Markets opened and closed, stores restocked, and industries maintained production. The flow of money, goods, and services proceeded as it had for decades, guided by unseen hands, automated systems, and methodical planning. Businesses expanded or contracted incrementally, and small financial adjustments happened daily. Almost no one considered the year as a historical unit. Instead, attention remained on the immediate: paychecks, bills, minor purchases, and routine decisions. Social life maintained its gentle course. Neighbors greeted one another quietly. Families dined together, often in silence or soft conversation. Community events occurred, small and familiar, rather than historic or newsworthy. Friendships endured through repetition of routine, weekend visits, and simple exchanges of courtesy. Across towns and cities, life unfolded predictably, without fanfare, leaving no one to mark the passing of time as a moment of historical note. The media chronicled events with steady calm. Headlines reported minor occurrences, local news, small political adjustments, community happenings. Nothing extraordinary punctuated the year in a way that demanded memory. Televisions, radios, and newspapers provided information, but nothing that caused people to reflect, celebrate, or remember. The nation's history continued quietly, without dramatic interruption, unnoticed by the very individuals living it. Sleep carried citizens through night after night, week after week. Rest arrived predictably, gently. While bodies rested, policies shifted slightly, streets adjusted, machines recalibrated, and systems continued functioning. The passage of time was uninterrupted by reflection or fanfare. People awoke to days that seemed ordinary, each one blending seamlessly into the next. The accumulation of experience, small and unremarkable, created a year that moved forward in silence. As the final days approached, few noticed the turning of the calendar. The year ended as it had begun, quietly, gently, without ceremony. Birthdays, anniversaries, and small celebrations occurred in personal spheres, yet they did not mark the year as historically significant. The nation, collectively and individually, had moved forward. Life's continuity persisted without interruption. No one paused to observe that an entire year had passed. And then the calendar flipped. The next day dawned. Morning light touched rooftops, streets, and homes in the familiar way. Streets welcomed cars, buses, and pedestrians. Offices, schools, and shops opened their doors. The nation continued its slow, steady rhythm, oblivious to the fact that a full year had quietly ended without recognition. Its progress was silent, its passage almost invisible, yet its effects accumulated inexorably. Historians might one day notice, future observers might remark upon trends, shifts, and minor adjustments. Policy changes, social developments, and economic movements would eventually be catalogued. Yet, at the moment, during its quiet unfolding, almost no one realized they had lived through a piece of history. The year had passed as unremarkably as any day, yet it existed fully, shaping the world subtly and continuously. Life continued into the new year seamlessly. The streets, homes, schools, and offices moved in the same calm rhythm. People awoke, completed tasks, rested, and repeated routines. The quiet march of ordinary days remained uninterrupted. The nation had advanced by inches, subtly, without recognition, without fanfare, without ceremony. The past year existed only in the gentle memory of systems, institutions, and the slow cumulative actions of countless individuals. A year ended without being remembered. Days and nights passed without reflection. Small changes accumulated. Continuity persisted. And yet, even unobserved, the year mattered. Each minor action, each unnoticed correction, each habitual movement contributed to the ongoing function of society. The passage of time, silent and unremarkable, ensured that the future remained orderly, predictable, and continuous. The nation moved forward, quietly, while its citizens slept, worked, and lived through the ordinary unfolding of days. Even as calendars changed, the subtle effects remained. Systems adjusted, people continued routines, and life proceeded as always. The unremarkable march of time continued without fanfare. The year ended, and the next began in a slow, gentle, and persistent rhythm. Soft, steady, unobserved, yet essential. A year may pass without notice. It may leave no memories, no celebrations, no dramatic events to mark its presence. Yet life continues, and the world, imperceptibly, moves forward. History is made in quiet increments, in the invisible adjustments, in the ordinary flow of days, weeks, and months. And so the year concluded, not noticed by nearly all. Its passage was quiet, its presence subtle, its effects real. And the nation awoke to a new day, a new year, continuing on the slow, unremarkable, yet essential march of life.